It's basically like about the fact that human beings are so vulnerable when we're born. Like, it's really interesting. You look around the animal kingdom or look at the sort of world of mammals, and you compare a human baby and like a giraffe calf and a monkey child, or any sort of zebra being born, or a horse being born, or a cow being born, or a pig. Like, all these animals have so much more physical function than we do when we're born. Human babies are basically a potato for 6 months that need other people so desperately to keep them alive. There's this delay of maturation in a human being, until we're maybe 3 or 4, when we can then be a bit more mobile out in the world and build social connections in like school or whatever, and start being properly socialized. We're basically stuck to our parents for the first 2-3 years of life. And then we don't really say that somebody's fully matured until 18, or maybe even 21, or maybe even 25. Whereas the comparison I'm trying to draw is, you look at when a giraffe is born, the baby can walk already. Yes, it might struggle a little bit to stand and fall over a few times, but on the day of its birth, a giraffe's baby can walk. And these ideas were kind of put forward in relation to neuroplasticity in a podcast that I listened to, where the guy was basically saying that once something like a giraffe is born, it is then largely a what's the right word? A puppet of its biological conditioning from birth, from the innate mechanisms that are there, from the genetic code and the sort of the instincts. Is the way that we think about it a lot in the animal kingdom. Then once it's born, its maturation is done in terms of putting in those biological mechanisms that it will just carry out throughout its life. It will know it needs to hunt for food, it needs to avoid predators, and it wants to reproduce, and all this kind of stuff, and it will just kind of carry out those processes largely unconsciously, because animals are less neuroplastic than humans. Those kind of mechanisms don't change quite as much. Whereas with us, we have such a greater capacity for neuroplasticity that, and this was the argument of the guy on the podcast, was it's almost like we're born so much earlier in the maturation kind of, process than other animals, because the more a human being is exposed to the world, the more the mechanisms of neuroplasticity can kind of allow us to adapt to that cultural environment. We can develop skills that are so fine-tuned and like specific to our culture and to the society that we live in, the demands of that society, and it's neuroplasticity that allows us to do that. It's like we come out half-baked in a way, and like there's all this really, really essential biological development in the womb, but then we come out and then it's almost like we're culturally developed then, and then our process of maturation doesn't end until we're 18 years old. We've already been on Earth for 18 years. And it's neuroplasticity that allows that to happen, and means that it's adaptive for us to be born so vulnerable, because it's almost like we're born as a more malleable being in a way. Like when a giraffe's born, it's just got this set of mechanisms that it will then carry out. Whereas with us, because our brain can absorb so much and change physically, because of experience, it's like we can pick up so much insight from our environment when we're growing up, and that allows us to be such a huge force in the world, because we can learn so quickly and adapt. So I don't know. That's a lot of yap, and I don't really know what I'm talking about. But that's the point I was going to make last week.
No, it was really good. That's interesting, because the animal mind seems like has a head start on the human mind, whereas the human mind might take like a lot longer to get to the point of the animal mind, but it's got way, way, way more potential in neuroplasticity.
Yep.
So it can excel with that.
Yep.
One of the differences in consciousness. There is this philosopher called Locke, and he describes this infant mind as a blank slate. I don't know what language it's in, but he says tabula rasa.
Yeah. It's Latin.
Which means blank slates, and it's like that. It really is. Whereas, the animal's just so fast at adapting. It's like it's born and it kind of just already stands up. Like humans, a toddler might take a long time to walk. The giraffe, he literally stands up and goes. And
it's interesting, isn't it? That it's just interesting. I think the beginning of this thought process, this discussion, is the fact that the most advanced species of animal in the world is born in some of the most vulnerable ways. Like a human baby is not surviving on its own for a while. Because even in our culture today, would you let a 12-year-old make its own decisions in life and just put it out into the world? I mean, maybe it would survive physically, but is it really going to be nurtured and have a good place in society? It's going to be very difficult to do that. So we wait until we're 18 or 21 or whatever to actually kind of take a full bite out of our own lives and really have it in our power. It's just really interesting. And I think there's a relationship between that. And obviously this guy's point I listened to was because of neuroplasticity, and actually it's adaptive for us to be born so vulnerable because we're almost still developing, and we're developing in the specific environment that we're born into with a specific set of skills we need to learn, based on our education system or what the society needs and how sort of, I don't know, the economic situation and what sort of skills are valuable in that market. Because there's no way you could teach a giraffe how to code, but a human being, like, we're able to learn things like, computer code and stuff, which is so specific to our culture. If we were just following instincts and purely just carrying out innate mechanisms like much of the animal kingdom, we wouldn't be able to adapt so quickly to things like AI and whatever the hell that is. And that's why things accelerate so quickly, and why it's so terrifying.
David Hume, he words the human mind the best way I've heard it worded, and is that the human mind is just a mirror of the external world. That's all it is. So knowledge comes in, output comes out, or sort of action comes out. Whereas I don't think the animal really has this mirror. It seems like it has its kind of, the animal has its kind of future already designed for it. It almost like doesn't have free will. Like it. Whereas,
well, I have a bit I can add to this, which I know what you're trying to get at, because it was last year at Exeter, my first year of uni. We looked at it was an animal behaviour module. We looked at what are called fixed action patterns, where an animal develops this innate pattern of behaviour because it's adaptive for their survival and reproduction, but then they can't, once the behavior has been activated, they can't then cancel it. They have to go completely through with it. And the stimulus that activates it is quite broad, so it can then get confused and enter into this action pattern in a context where it's not necessary or a bit odd. So, for example, the best example I can give is the common robin bird that we associate with Christmas time and stuff, the one with the big little red breast, quite small little thing that flies around. They have a fixed action pattern, males do, to recognize the red chest of other males to attack them during like their mating season, right? They have this mechanism that makes them attack that color of red, because that's them sort of fighting off competition for mates, essentially. So it's a very adaptive action, like fixed action pattern if it happens in the right context. But you can find loads of videos online of robins attacking Royal Mail workers because their uniform is the same red or the same sort of complexion of red as like a competitive male. And so the robin will start attacking this postman, even though it's not a competitive male and they're not competing for the same mate. But because of that mechanism, that this fixed action pattern they have to carry out, they just see the stimulus and it stimulates an instinct and they just act. Whereas I think human beings, we do have things, I think we do have fixed action patterns a lot of the time. And maybe that's what addiction is, when you get stuck in these same patterns over and over again, you rely on them for your kind of psychological stability. But I think we have more of an ability to stop and pause and go, okay, maybe we want to fine tune our behavior in a different way. And that's maybe that self-awareness and the sense of self we have as human beings that makes us different from the animal world. But does that help the point you were trying to explore there? Because I get what you mean when you're like, animals are set in kind of their ways when they're born. It's very difficult for them to then transcend their own conditioning, whereas humans, we kind of can do that if we want to.
Yeah, I think it seems like these drives that are in us, humans can control more than animals. And animal is just, when you put your food down, when you give your cat some food, it's there, it's right there, it's eating it, it's acting on. That's it. That's what I mean. Act on impulse. They act on impulse. They can't not act on the impulse, whereas we can. And I wanted to ask, like, is the animal brain? I'm guessing it doesn't have like the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, all these different brain parts that a human has. Like, do you know if there's any like big differences with the animal brain?
Well, I don't want to say anything too like out there and wrong, because I'm not I'm not an expert. I'm just some random psychology student that has a lot of yap. But I guess the general sense is that they have the more primal brain structures that we do, or things that are very similar to them. So they would have something like an amygdala, like an emotional center that regulates like fear responses and things like that, and the brainstem and the cerebellum and all that kind of stuff. But then what we call the higher order parts of the brain, the cortex, will be less developed in many animals and will be absent in many other animals as well. The human cortex is massive in comparison. And part of that is this frontal lobe area that's particularly big in humans. So yeah, there is something to that. I mean, and that's where a lot of our abstract thinking comes from and our moral reasoning. One thing I was just going to say is you were talking about, like, a cat being compelled to eat food if it's put in front of it. There's no way we take like a hungry lion, right, and put a steak in front of it. No, but if we take a hungry lion and put a steak in front of it, but then try and explain moral philosophy about the cruelty of animals, and that there are some people that choose to be vegan or vegetarian, a lion's going to have no idea what that means. It doesn't care. It will just see the steak and eat it. It doesn't have reasoning on those kind of levels, which is a very human function. When we can do that, and we can decide to do things like be vegan or vegetarian, even though it goes against our biological conditioning to see a piece of meat and want to eat it. So it's interesting.
And where does the kind of neuroplasticity kind of change things? Like, because a child does kind of act on impulse a lot more, but is there something that the neuroplasticity has kind of separated us from almost kind of just an animal to an animal that has sort of grown up in society with higher, like, things that guide it? Yeah.
Well, I think the notion that children act on impulse more probably just comes from the fact that the world is so novel to them. Everything's so new. Everything's like, oh, what's this new shiny thing that I've never seen before? Let's jump at it and figure it out. Let's try and explore it. Let's touch it. Let's put it in our mouth. Let's run around it and see why. Like, everything is so new and exciting. And so you're not stuck in the same patterns of perception and action like adults are. Like, we get so rigidly held in the ways that we think about the world, the ways that we behave. I don't think we realise that sort of childhood novelty and that novel perspective on reality that we have as a child. And was your question what neuroplasticity has to do with it? I think that's because it allows us to adapt to an ever-changing environment. Like the life and the demands of an animal, if human intervention isn't too drastic in their sort of habitat and their life, it's pretty straightforward and has been that way for thousands of years. An insect, if a bee is born, it knows that it needs to pollinate and it needs to bring back pollen to the hive, and feed the queen or whatever, so she can keep giving birth to new worker bees and shit like that. Like, it's pretty set what their life's going to be. Whereas of our culture, with me and you at 20 to our culture at me and you at 50 or 40 or 30, even 10 years from now, is going to be very different. And so, there's going to be a very different set of skills expected from us, different set of understanding of the world is going to have to be different. Like, some moral questions about how much AI affects our lives or what we do politically. Like, there's always, the human culture and the human world is always changing so drastically. And that's only possible because of neuroplasticity, because our brain can be molded and we can learn and adapt so quickly.